Welcome to my free online course, How to Record Ambient Guitar. It's a companion to my very popular course, How to Play Ambient Guitar. And my goal here is to share with you everything I've learned over the last 15, 20 years about recording ambient guitar so that you have all the information, all the tools, knowledge tools, tips and tricks you need to record, mix, master, and release beautiful ambient guitar music. You may be at different parts along the journey. I'm going to start from the very beginning, but with these chapter markers below, you'll be able to easily skip to the topics that you're interested in. So without further ado, let's get to work. So have you been wanting to record gorgeous ambient guitar soundscapes like the one playing in the background, but have been afraid of the price tag? Well, don't be. I'm here to show you all the essential elements that you'll need to record amazing ambient guitar soundscapes without breaking the bank. Let's get started. Essential piece of kit number one that you're going to need? Yeah, it's a computer. You knew that was coming. The good news is that the computer that you already have is likely perfect for audio recording. And let me give you a couple of examples. This guy here is a 2020 MacBook Air. It's a very low cost, for Apple, of course. It's a low cost MacBook that is 5 years old now. And this thing works great for recording audio. I've recorded up to 10 tracks simultaneously on this little computer, and it doesn't even have a fan. Now, if you're a Windows person instead of an Apple person, chances are that any Windows-based machine, modern machine that you have is going to work great. I'm not currently using Windows machines, but I did pull this out of the archives. This is about a 2008, 2009 Lenovo ThinkPad. It's running Windows 7. And I fired it up the other day in preparation for this video and hooked it up to an audio interface and was still able to record with it. It's over 15 years old. So seriously, whatever computer you have is going to work just great. Piece of kit number two, it's an audio interface. And if you're shopping for audio interfaces for the first time, you may find it to be a bewildering landscape of options from $50 to like over $10,000 or something crazy like that. And yes, in my studio, I have some nice and expensive audio interfaces, but I've been doing this now for 20 years. To get started, all you need is a very economical audio interface. And here's a great example. This is only one of many. This is an Arturia Mini Fuse 2. And I bought this recently to use with my mobile recording rig, which includes that Apple MacBook. And this thing is great. It has all the essential features that you'll need. So let me go over the features here so you know what they are no matter what brand you decide you want to buy. On the back, you'll see that this is a USB interface, and that's important. You'll want USB to be able to easily connect your audio interface to any computer that you have. Secondly, there are two output jacks for speakers, and this is a good option as you grow in your studio. You want to be able to hook these up to speakers to hear the music, right? Optional is MIDI. So this particular device has MIDI in and out. That can be really useful if you're connecting a keyboard or other MIDI-enabled devices up to the audio interface as part of your recording process. On the front, what you're going to want to look for is two channels. And this Arturia has two channels. They both have gain knobs so you can adjust the input level. And the jacks here can function as microphone jacks, as line inputs, and as instrument inputs. So you could and can plug your guitar directly into the interface if that's the way you're going to record. then there's a volume, master volume, and then there is headphone jack. Okay, so look for a 2-channel, and I do recommend 2 channels so you can record in stereo. Look for a 2-channel interface with these basic features, and you're almost guaranteed that no matter what brand you buy, as long as it's a trusted brand, it's going to sound just great. All right, essential piece of kit number 3 is something to monitor the music that you're making with. And that could be a pair of studio monitors. I've got a really nice set of monitors in my studio, and I won't tell you how much they cost because it's kind of ridiculous. But if you're just getting started, don't go down the studio monitor route right away. It is more expensive, even lower cost studio monitors, and then you have to deal with the room. So my recommendation is to get a decent pair of headphones. There are a ton of options out there. I think I would recommend, if you can swing the budget, looking for something in the $100 to $150 range as of the summer of 2025. This particular pair I've had for about 13 years. They are the Sennheiser HD 280 Pros, and I really like them. They're very cost effective, they sound great, they don't accentuate the bass or the treble, so they're pretty truthful, if that makes sense. They're pretty flat in what they get and you give back to you, so you can really understand what's going on in the audio signal. If you can't swing $100 to $150, you can probably find a pretty good pair in the $75 to $100 range. I do recommend, though, trying to spend enough to get a decent pair, because that is a critical link between your ears and what you're recording. I'll bet you can guess essential piece of kit number 4, and yes, that's correct. Recording software. If you're on a Mac like I am and you're just getting started, I recommend trying out the GarageBand app that comes with your Mac. There's no extra cost involved, and I'll tell you what, that is a very capable piece of recording software. It's got a ton of effects. It is easily able to record 2, 3, 4 channels at one go, and to be honest, many commercial albums have been made with GarageBand. So if they can do it, you can do it. So it's a great free option. If you are looking to upgrade from GarageBand on a Mac, I do recommend seriously considering Logic Pro. I'm not being paid by Apple or anything like that. I use Logic Pro. I bought it 13, 14 years ago, and it's my standard piece of recording software now. It's just great. But there are many other options that run really well on an Apple computer. If you are a Windows user, and hopefully you've got a newer machine than this one, my recommendation, hands down, is Reaper. I used it for years. I still use it from time to time, and it is a wonderful piece of recording software. You can download it for free. It's got an unlimited trial period, although if you do use it, go ahead and buy it because it's not that expensive. And it's super capable. It really is. Super, super capable. The only thing I will say about Reaper is if you're creating complicated mixes and need a lot of different effects, you may find it desirable to get some other plugins to incorporate into the Reaper environment. The good news is that most of those other plugins that you might desire can be found for free or for a very low cost. So again, no matter which way you go, there are very cost-effective, budget-friendly options for recording software. And critical piece of kit number 5 is, oh, wait a minute. There is no critical piece of kit number 5. The only other thing that's critical besides the 4 that we've covered, it's you and your instrument. That's all you need to get started creating beautiful ambient guitar soundscapes. Now that we've got our basic recording gear procured, I'm going to walk through the process of taking an ambient guitar pedal board, connecting it to our recording rig, and starting to capture gorgeous ambient guitar sounds. Let's have at it, shall we? Obviously, you're going to need an ambient guitar pedal board. If you've never built one before, I've got an entire playlist that I'll link in the description below with a bunch of videos about my process, my thinking about how to build really great sounding ambient guitar pedal boards. But let's just consider this one briefly. It's a small pedal board, pretty straightforward. The first pedal in the signal chain is going to be a compressor, which is an always-on item for me. From the compressor, I'm running the audio path into an overdrive. It could be any kind of overdrive. This is a more expensive Strymon overdrive, but even a TC Electronic Mojo Mojo can sound fabulous in the context of ambient guitar. From there, the signal path is heading into an amp modeler. And again, this is a fairly pricey Strymon amp modeler, but there are a lot of options, including very affordable options like this TC Electronic IR loader. The idea is simply to get a flavor. You're simulating a guitar amp in your signal path. All right, so amp modeler, third, compressor, overdrive, amp modeler. From the amp modeler, we're going to head down to that lower level. And in my case, I'm heading on into a volume pedal. For me, it's a critical piece of my kit because I do a lot of volume swells. If you find yourself in that situation, you're definitely going to want to consider a volume pedal. This is a Morley. There are many great brands, though. Just Morley's doesn't have a corner on the market. From the volume pedal, I'll slide over into the middle there. I've got a delay pedal. We're talking ambient guitar, so delay is obviously a critical part of the puzzle. This is an Echos. It's a Keeley Echos, but there are many great options. Another great option that I don't happen to have here today is a TC Electronic Flashback 2. I love that little pedal. It sounds great and it's very cost effective. And finally, another TC Electronic pedal. I did buy this one, by the way. This is not a sponsored video, but it's the Hall of Fame Reverb. Okay, so it's just a great economical choice for a reverb. All right, so now we've got our pedal board built out and ready to go. Where do we go from here? We need to connect the pedal board up to our audio interface. So we've got our two channels here. This is a stereo board. So I'm going to grab two guitar cables and I'm going to plug them into the last pedal in the signal chain, in this case, the reverb. Then I'm going to grab the other end of my guitar cables. Here they are right here. And I'm simply going to plug them into the inputs of my audio interface. So it's really that easy. Now, once they're connected, you've got a couple of decisions. If your interface is like the Arturia, not only does it have line inputs, but it also has instrument level inputs. And there's a little button for each of the channels that allows me to switch between a line input and an instrument level input. And what I would suggest you do is a little bit of experimentation. What you're looking to do is get a good, healthy signal that's not too loud and overdriving the audio interface. You don't want any red or clipping, at the far end of the meter. You want to stay in, ideally, if your meter is green, you want to stay in that green area, where your level's good. So you may have heard me use the word stereo a few minutes ago, and I do recommend setting up your pedal board for stereo if you can. It's going to give you a lot more options for achieving that wide, lush, ambient guitar soundscape that all of us love. Mono's okay, and stereo's optional, but it is a recommended option, at least from me. All right, so let's take what we have so far, finish the connection into our recording rig, and get some sounds out of our ambient guitar pedal board. I'll see you in a minute after I get everything set up. All right, I'm back with everything set up in my recording rig. And if you haven't seen episode 1 of Recording Essentials, I would recommend taking a peek at that. I'll include a link in the video description. So first up, obviously, is the computer. You can go Mac, you can go Windows, whatever you want. And I do recommend plugging in your laptop if you are using a laptop so you don't run out of battery power in the middle of a recording session. Here's the audio interface that I'm using. Again, it's that Arturia audio interface, and I've got it set up for my recording session. And what you'll be able to see is the levels that I've got going on here. All right, so on this interface, as I pluck, the little blue lights light up in the volume knob. If the level is too high, it's going to turn red. And I don't want to be anywhere near turning red. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now, as we think about the recording software, I'm using Logic Pro, as I mentioned in the earlier episode, and I've got my levels set here on the channel where I'm recording. So let me play a couple notes here, and you can see where it's going to peak out. As you can see, the peak is occurring at negative 11.2. So I've got plenty of headroom. I'm not in danger of clipping, as they call it, digital clipping. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, that seems pretty low. Shouldn't I try and push it closer to 0 dB? And the answer is no. And the reason why I say no is I want you to set up your recording software to do two things. One is set your recording software to record at a 24-bit depth. Okay, so 24 bits. You'll probably have an option of 16, 24, or 32. Select 24. This is going to give you 144 decibels of dynamic range. In other words, you'll be able to record absolute silence at 0 dB, and you'll be able to record standing next to a commercial jetliner taking off without it exceeding 0 dB. Kind of wild to think about. So if we're 11 decibels down from the max, that means we still have, 133 decibels to play around with. So we're not in danger of being too quiet at all. And I'd rather be a little conservative and not get anywhere close to that 0 dB limit while recording the signal. All right, the second factor to consider when you're setting up your recording software for recording is the sample rate. Some people think that the higher the sample rate, 96 kilohertz, 192 kilohertz, the higher that rate is, the higher fidelity the sound is going to be. And that could not be farther from the truth. Sample rate, all it does is determine what the frequency range that you can record at is going to be in the software. If you take my recommendation, and I hope you do, to record at 48 kilohertz, you're going to be able to record all the way up to 24 kilohertz. That's a big frequency range. You probably know that human hearing only goes up to 20 kilohertz at best. If you're an old fart like me, you're not anywhere near 20 kilohertz in what you can hear. So this is going to be plenty. So now we have our level set, and we have the kind of audio file we want to create when we record, 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. Now we're ready to start playing. Here we go. what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Bill, I don't want to go through the trouble of building an ambient guitar pedal board. I just want to plug my guitar directly into the audio interface and figure out how to get amazing ambient guitar tones. This time, instead of plugging our pedal board into the audio interface, I'm just going to take a guitar cable from the guitar, run it directly into the audio interface, into the instrument/line level input. Once that's done, we can set up our recording software to record the guitar. Now, I'm using Logic Pro, but every software package has similar capabilities. The first thing you're going to want to do is reduce the input-output buffer size down as far as you can without getting crackling or audio artifacts. This is going to reduce the latency. In other words, the time that from when you pluck the guitar until you hear it in your headphones. You want to keep that as short as possible. So I've moved my latency down from 1024 samples all the way down to 64. And that works pretty well. Here's what a dry signal sounds like direct into my recording software. Yeah. It's not that great, is it? It's also kind of quiet. Well, we're going to fix that in just a moment. Because now that I've got signal into my software, I can now begin layering some plugins to affect the sound and get what I'm looking for. The first thing I typically do is add a compressor. And the great thing about any of these software recording packages is that it's going to include some kind of compressor plugin. This is one called Squash from Logic Pro, and I'm just using it to literally squash the guitar signal a little bit. As you can hear, it just increases the sustain. Next up, we're going to need an amp modeler. Now, Logic Pro does include an amp modeler, but I have downloaded a free amp modeler to use today. I'll include a link to it below. It's the Blue Cat Audio BC free amp. I've got it set to a Fender amp style. Here's what it sounds like. Yeah, pretty straightforward. It can also do Marshall sounds, but I typically prefer a cleaner Fender style amp sound for the type of ambient guitar pieces that I create. Next up, we're going to need a way, if it's important to you, we're going to need a way to have a volume pedal for volume swells. And here's what I've got going on. Now let me explain. I'm using a Logic Pro gain plugin, and I've mapped a MIDI expression pedal. MIDI expression pedal to the gain control. And when I move the pedal, you can see the gain control goes from nothing to a lot of something. So the expression pedal that I'm using is actually also a volume pedal. It's the Lehle Mono S. It's kind of pricey, and there are other options. I haven't found a truly cheap option, but you can also do this, and I've done this many times with an inexpensive standard expression pedal. And then you'll need some kind of controller to plug that expression pedal into that can convert the data into MIDI. And this MIDI commander works pretty well. I will leave some links in the video description with a couple of options for you to consider. Might be worth doing a little research on Amazon or some other places to see what is out there. Once you've selected the solution for the volume pedal, you'll want to look at your software's instructions for using the MIDI Learn functionality. This will allow you to map the volume pedal or the expression pedal to a specific parameter or knob on a plugin. And that's what I'm doing here. And in Logic, there's an area for mapping parameters to expression pedals. That's going to vary for each software package. So again, take a look at the documentation to see how it works. And if you have a standard volume pedal and don't really want to fool around with all the MIDI stuff, I would definitely recommend plugging your guitar into the volume pedal and then plugging the volume pedal directly into the audio interface and experimenting to see if it produces a volume swell that sounds good to you and allows you to achieve the type of sound you're looking for. All right, let's continue to build our sound with other plugins. Just a quick mention, if you do feel like you want to tweak the EQ, your recording software's EQ plugin is going to work great. This is the Logic EQ, and I've just used it to brighten up the sound just a bit. All right, next up, we're going to start getting into delay plugins. And I have downloaded and installed a few different free delay options to show you, just so we can all kind of experiment with them together. So I'll include links in the video description. I'm not getting paid for any of them because they're free, right? So it's really cool. The first one to check out is the Vox & Go Tempo Delay. And this thing sounds great. Here's what it sounds like. Yeah, isn't that great? It's a standard, straightforward delay plugin. As you can see, there's a left and a right section, so you can create stereo ping-ponging style delays. In addition, you can synchronize this delay with your recording software's tempo. So if you run the tempo down to about 40 beats per minute, you can get a nice long delay. Sounds great. And now that we've got some delay going, I want to introduce you to the reverb plugin, which is all the way at the end of the signal chain. And it's one of the most fabulous free plugins out there, the Valhalla Supermassive, which can create reverb and delay types of sounds. I've got a preset set up. It's Ice Flow, Nowhere to Go. I just tweaked it a little bit, switched the mode to Andromeda, and here's what I get with just the Supermassive. Oh yeah. And if I add the Vox & Go tempo delay and start doing some volume swells, it's kind of like instant nirvana. I mean, I could just kind of play this for hours and just kind of go, oh yeah. Really great. All right, the second free delay plugin I've got queued up is the Chow Matrix by Chow DSP. And as you can see, it's pretty complicated looking. It's not quite that hard to set up, but you can create very complex delay nodes with very complex repeats. Here's what this sounds like here. Yeah, it's pretty complicated, isn't it? And if I do a volume swell, you almost don't need a reverb plugin because the repeats are so complex. But it's well worth downloading this plugin and playing around with it. In some ways, I can't believe it's free. It's so capable of creating very complex and beautiful delays. Free delay plugin number 3 is the Ursa DSP. And here's a preset that I created with this plugin. Yeah, here's some volume swells. As you can hear, there's kind of a quavering going on. And that is because the Ursa DSP has a grain capability. You can create the rate and density of the grains. These are little slices of delay repeats that occur. Yeah, it's very nice. And if you combine it with the Valhalla Supermassive, oh yeah. That thing really rocks. Free delay plugin number 4, Valhalla Freak Echo. This normally is used to do pitch shifted delays, but if you dial the shift down, you can create very nice long delays by using the delay sync capability. Yeah, pretty nice, long, standard, simple sounding delay. But again, if you combine it with the Supermassive, you can still get beautiful, swelling delays that are just great. They're gorgeous. For our last delay plugin, I have included a paid plugin. And the reason why is it's really my favorite, one of my absolute favorite delay plugins, the Valhalla Delay. And I think, once you download and play around with a bunch of free delay plugins, it's worth checking out some paid plugins to see if they will get you some features that perhaps you can't get on or in a free delay plugin. One of the great things about Valhalla Delay is that it can do up to a 20-second long delay, which is great for Frippertronic style looping. Here's a 10.2 second tape style delay from the Valhalla Delay. Yeah, that's a long delay, isn't it? And as you can hear, I've added in age, wow, flutter. Bring it down a little bit here. There we go. And now let's add in the Supermassive. Yeah, and it's got all of these tape modes that are just really great. So maybe I want to do a reverse pitch. If I leave the pitch at wherever it is, there it is at 0, I can actually get reverse delays. Yeah, super cool. Definitely worth checking out when you're ready to step up to a paid delay plugin. I've not added in a lot of different plugins, partially because there are so many options you can just go crazy and actually never finish getting a good sound. So I would suggest sticking with the basics and get a sound that is what you like. Go ahead and create the recording. You can always adjust the plugin order, the plugin parameters in the final mixdown. The piece that I'm using as an example today has an interesting history. It's the last track on my album Layers, and it's called The Hard Road. It started out as a 2-layer piece back in 2020. I recorded a rhythmic finger-picked part that you see here on the screen, and I'm using my PRS baritone guitar, and I'm using a Strymon Dig to create a rhythmic delay pattern. Let's listen to just a few seconds of it. And the second part that kind of lies underneath that plucked rhythmic part is an Ebo Frippertronics layer. And I'm using the Strymon Volante delay pedal to create a Frippertronics style loop delay. You could use the El Capistan. I also use the TC Electronic Flashback Triple Delay, any number of pedals, but I'm using the Volante to get that long, swelling, decaying, looping kind of thing. So anyhow, I put those two layers together and posted it as a YouTube video in March of 2020. Well, a couple years roll by, and then as I was putting together Layers, the album, I thought about the piece. I thought, I like that piece a lot, but it needs something else. So I decided to create some more layers for the piece. So let me go ahead and flip over to Logic Pro and walk you through the layers and how I put together the entire piece. As you can see, I've got queued up here the guitar track. And oh, by the way, if you're not using Logic Pro, no worries. You can just simply take the concepts that I'm using and transfer them over to your software. Anyway, here's the core guitar piece, and I'll just play a second, right? You've already heard it. And it pretty much is the performance. As you can see, there's only a little cut in the audio at the beginning, but the rest is just me playing straight on through. And that's how I create a lot of my ambient guitar pieces, the core part of the piece. It's just me sitting down and performing all the way through whatever the core track in the overall song is going to be. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the Frippertronics track. Again, it's me using the Volante delay pedal to create these layered loops. And one of the things that I do a lot, especially with Frippertronics layers, is I don't always listen to the original piece. So that is definitely the case when I recorded this part. I was not listening to the guitar part. I was just playing this independently and started creating layers, right? And just kind of built them up until I got the basic bed here of what I was looking for, and then was able to add in the guitar part in Logic, which I had already recorded. Now, it's not like it was totally random. I did know the key, obviously, of the original guitar part, so I made sure that the layers kind of went in a direction that would complement the key signature of the original guitar part. Now, that gets me to the point where I posted the original video in March of 2020. When I came around into 2023 and was putting the Layers album together, as I mentioned, I wanted to add a couple of other parts. And I knew that one part I wanted to think about was a bass line. I just wanted something that sat underneath the guitar and the Frippertronics and created a little low end. So to that end, I grabbed a Pigments synthesizer plugin, which I really, really like. And I just kind of, typically with Pigments, it's a fairly complex synth, at least for me it is. So I typically go through the presets and find one that is close to what I'm looking for, and then I modify it to suit whatever the piece is. So as you can see, I've got a synth bass preset pulled up that is slightly modified. And here's what it sounds like. There we go. It's a pretty straightforward kind of synth bass, right? And the thing is, I'm only playing one note all the way through the entire piece. So it really is just there to add a little bit of low-end texture. So let me go ahead and start the guitar here with the bass, and then I'll let the bass drop out. And you'll hear, make sure you're wearing headphones or you won't be able to hear it. You'll hear a little bit of change. Now, I'm going to go ahead and drop out the bass. Here we go. It's subtle, but you lose that low end, right? And a lot of times in creating these arrangements, it's really helpful to have a subtle low end. The next thing I was looking for was some rhythm, because I'm playing a fairly rhythmic kind of part. This is not a bunch of volume swells like I often do. I'm slapping the guitar every now and then and things like that. So I thought, well, maybe I need some drums. So the issue was, well, for me it's not an issue, but the situation was that I played the piece without a click track. I just played. The only thing I was listening to was the dotted eighth rhythm of the Strymon dig. So one of the cool things about Logic is that you can have it analyze a track and then set the project tempo to suit the track. So that's what I did. And as you can see here, this first line where, it says tempo here, you can actually see that the tempo changes slightly throughout the piece because I'm not a robot. I'm just a fallible human that, kind of plays as I feel it. Now, if I add in the metronome, you'll hear it follow along. And if you look up at the top here, you'll see the tempo actually changing between about 96 and 99 beats per minute, about. All right, so that got me where I needed to be in terms of the configuration of Logic. Now I needed a drum part, and as I am wont to do, I used the Logic Drummer, which is a really great, I really like the Logic Drummer for the types of pieces I do. For me, drums are always secondary. Apologies to the drummers out there, but they're always secondary to the overall piece. As a matter of fact, a lot of times they're kind of buried in the mix, and I just have them there for a pulse. This is a little bit more, but it's pretty mellow. So I used the Logic Drummer to create these drum pieces, and here's what it sounds like. Let me go ahead and solo. There we go. And as you can hear, there's very few drums being used. I knocked out the cymbals, I knocked out pretty much almost everything, right? And it's just the kick and the toms in a pulsing rhythm. All right. And one of the cool things that you can do with these drummer parts is set the drummer parts to follow a particular track. So I actually set them to follow the guitar. And here's what the guitar and the drums sound like together. It's pretty cool. It's just following along with my slight variations in tempo. And then I was able to create different parts with different types of fills. I can raise the intensity of the drumming or lower it down, whatever I wanted to in the overall context of the song, until I get to the end. And I decided to go ahead and drop the drums out early so that everything kind of dies away except for the initial guitar part. All right, so let me go ahead and bring everything into the mix so you can hear all four pieces together. Yeah. So I hope that makes sense in terms of how to think about expanding out your ambient guitar piece into multiple layers, into multiple tracks, into a full arrangement of your piece. The next step is to do a mix down and balance out the volume levels, the panning, the equalization, the compression, the stereo imaging, putting all of that together to turn these 4 parts into one cohesive piece. All right, I've got Logic Pro pulled up, and I've got the same sample piece from episode 4 pulled up, the hard road from my album Layers. As we discussed, it's a 4-layer piece comprised of guitar, frippertronics, drums, and a synthesizer bass. So let's go ahead and think about this mix down. We're going to be doing a couple of different things. First off, we want to get everything balanced in terms of the volume. So let me go ahead and pick a spot here in the middle so we can hear how everything is currently balanced. Okay? Now, guitar is very prominent. That's because I'm an ambient guitarist. The drums and the synth bass are going to be secondary, and that's by design. So if we look at the Logic mixer here, you can see that guitar is set pretty much to 0 dB. It's at full scale, right, on the track there on the channel. And in terms of the drums, I've got them pulled back about 4.2 decibels. If I leave it all the way up, let's bring it up. It's going to be a little too loud for me. Yeah, it's just a little too loud. So I bring it down and it kind of reins it in. The frippertronics, I really want to ride underneath. So you can see that this is set to negative 16.8 in terms of the fader position. And if you're looking closely, you can also see that the level is changing, and that is because I've got some automation going with this frippertronics piece in terms of the volume. So if we look at the beginning where it's just the frippertronics, I've brought them kind of way up. Okay? But once everything starts kicking in, you'll see that I bring the level of the frippertronics layer down. So just watch and listen as I bring in the main guitar. And you can see in the automation that the volume level is just decreasing as we approach where the drums and the synth bass come in. And by the time we get there, the frippertronics layer is pretty low. It's kind of creating a texture way underneath. In terms of the synth bass, I talked about this last time, but I just really want it there to add a subtle low end. So it is very low in the mix. Okay? And although on the fader, it's still set to 0 dB, it's just low in the mix. It's not a loud part. And if we put it all together then, just listen to it again. That's kind of some basic balancing going on. What you'll see also is that none of these tracks are panned. They're all dead center, and that's because every track, it's a stereo track. That's not always the case with my pieces, but it is the case with this piece. All right, so let's examine each of these 4 tracks a little bit more in detail to see what I've got going on in terms of effects plugins. So first up is the guitar track, and as you can see, I've got 4 effects on that track. The first one is a de-esser, and that is simply to knock down the slaps that I'm doing on the strings. They're a little loud. And you can see there that the de-esser is catching those slaps and just bringing them down a little bit. Next up is a channel strip from Isotope called Neutron, and I'm using it just to basically equalize a little bit. It's got a little bit of excitation going on, a little saturation going on, and a little bit of compression going on. Not really much at all. You can see there's a little compression. Equalizers, very minimal. And then this module here called Sculptor is a little bit like the Soothe plugin by Oak Sound. Yeah, that can kind of help control resonant frequencies. That's all that's going on here. It's pretty straightforward. Then I've got a tiny little bit of the Valhalla Shimmer Reverb plugin. And I'll just let you look at the controls there if you wish. And it's very subtle, but it adds just a little bit of that shimmery goodness. And then finally, I've got the Soft Tube Tape plugin that adds a reel-to-reel tape kind of vibe to the track. And I like the way it turned out. All right, so let's hop down to the Frippertronics side of the equation. We've already talked about the automation going on there, but again, as far as actual plugins on the track, again, I'm using the Neutron 3 channel strip. You can see the equalizer's kind of weird. When I went to mix it, it was really muddy, so I decided to pull out some of the low end. Let me disable that equalizer. Yeah. So you can hear how kind of muddy that was. So I did have to work with that a little bit. So pulling out that, and then Sculptor, again, is a resonance control, a resonance detector. And you can see it's basically acting like a dynamic EQ. It's taking a lot out between 200 and 300 hertz. And I'll just mention with the Frippertronics style parts that I do with EBO, there does tend to be a lot of buildup and resonance in the 200 to 300 hertz range. And I would recommend, as you're considering mixing down your parts, to be looking out for these frequencies that are really poking out in some of the parts. And those are the ones to really kind of hone in on and focus in on. A couple of the other things I have is, again, another instance of the Soft Tube Tape plugin. And then I do have a FabFilter reverb on the EBO. It's pretty subtle, but it's there, right? It's a reverb. So that's the guitar and the Frippertronics piece. Again, we'll just play them together here momentarily so you can kind of recalibrate. Let's go ahead to the synth bass then and see what's going on there. As I mentioned earlier, I think last time, it's the Arturia Pigments synthesizer, really great sounding synth. And for this part, let me get over here. For this part, I have a couple things going. One is the Logic Overdrive, which is basically just a distortion plugin. So I added a little bit of distortion to the bass. So if I turn it off, yeah, I'm using it to raise the level a little bit, and you can hear that there's a little bit of drive. And I've got the tone turned down, so it's pretty, there's not much top end going on in the overdrive. The next plugin is the Logic Fat plugin, and I'm using this to enhance the bass, using it for some compression and some saturation. I've got quite a bit going on here. In a way, I'm using the Fat FX plugin as a channel strip because I've got a little bit of EQ going on. I've got the distortion. I've got the bass enhancement. That's kind of like EQ, and some compression. I'm even doing a little bit of hard clipping to control and squish that bass sound. And then, this is interesting, I've got a compressor, and it is side chained to the drums. So when the drums are hitting hard, I'm squishing down the level of the synth bass. That's kind of cool, right? So I want the drums to pop out, and I want the bass to kind of disappear a little bit. Let me pull in the drums here so you can kind of hear what's going on. So you can hear a little pumping up and down in the bass itself. I think it will still, let's see, I think it'll still happen. Yeah. There we go. You can see the drum, every time the drum hits, it is lowering the level of the synth bass and creating that pumping sound. Now, this is a Logic compressor, but many compressors, probably your recording software's compressor, can sidechain to another track so that the other track can control the amount of compression for the instrument that you're actually going to compress. It's an interesting trick that audio engineers have been using for decades. All right, and then finally, on the synth bass, I have another instance of the soft tube tape, reel-to-reel tape plugin. So that's my synth bass, and that's my Frippertronics, and that's my main guitar. Let's listen to all three together. Let's consider the effects plugins that I used on the drums. First up is a little bit of channel EQ, and this is the stock Logic equalizer plugin. I'm just dropping out some low end, a little bit of 500, and a little bit of 4K. The drums were just a little too muddy sounding in the low end, so dropping out some of that low end really helped out a lot. And then after that, I'm compressing the drums. And again, I'm using the Logic compressor. There's no side chain here, so this literally is compressing the drums. It's not a ton of compression, but I'm catching some of the big peaks and just kind of smoothing it out some. And then next after that is the ever-present tape plugin by Softtube. And then finally, I've got a plugin called The Velvet Machine by a company called Phonolith. And it's a granular kind of reverb plugin that sounds really cool. So let me turn it off here. Yeah, it's kind of plain. Bring it in. And I kept the settings such that the density of the grains is very low, so you can hear individual grains. The reason why I did this is that I feel like in the overall mix, it adds this underlying rhythmic texture that complements the drums, but it's very subtle because it's such a low level. Let's bring in everything here for a minute. You really can't hear it very distinctly in the overall mix. Maybe if you have better ears than me, which you probably do. If you're listening on headphones, you probably can hear the grains, but it's very subtle and it kind of rides under everything else. The only other thing that I did to mix this piece was on the master bus. I added a Chromaverb plugin. I don't always add reverb plugins on the master bus. Sometimes I'll set up an auxiliary bus like this one right here, and then I'll feed all of the channels that I want to have reverb. I'll feed everything in individually. In this case, however, I'm not actually using this bus, but I'm just putting the Chromaverb plugin on the master bus because I wanted to create an overall space for the entire mix. And as you can see, it's set very, very low. It's set down to 5% mix. So you can just kind of hear it under the covers, but it just adds another textural layer into the overall mix and kind of brings everything together. I'm avoiding using the word glue, which is way overused, but it does help bring everything together by helping all the tracks or all the parts and pieces sound like they're in the same physical space. Finally, in the overall mix, there's a couple of things that I have on my mix bus that generally are always there. One is a multimeter. So this is the Logic multimeter, and this allows me just to see what's going on. There's a couple of things that I always look for when I'm mixing. One, obviously, is going to be the level. Where am I sitting in terms of loudness for the mix? Now, I'm not talking about mastering and preparing the track for release to Spotify or a CD or wherever, Bandcamp. I'm just talking about the overall mix when I'm actually mixing down. And the overall level could vary quite a bit. In this piece, if you look at the LUFS level over here where it says 22.5, so I'm not being real concerned about pushing levels way up. As you can see, my peaks are running in the -10 range, and that's okay. This is a 24-bit, 48 kilohertz project. That means I have 144 decibels of dynamic range. If I take 10 decibels off, I still have 134, 133 left. Plenty of room without running into noise floor or anything like that. So that would be my advice, is don't worry about pushing things super high when you're mixing. Give yourself plenty of headroom. One of the other things that I like to look at as I'm mixing is the stereo image of the piece. And I'm using this goniometer, I think is how it's pronounced. There are several different ways to look at stereo imaging. One is in the analyzer portion of this meter. If you look at the correlation section here, where it says correlation, and we've got a red to green scale. Ideally, we want to keep that moving bar between the middle and to the right. So the middle would be 0, the right would be 1, the left would be -1. The further you get towards 1, the more in phase your piece is. If you go all the way to 1 and it just stays there, like all the way to the right, that means you're in mono. And if you go all the way to the left, you're basically totally out of phase and you're not going to hear anything. So ideally, you want to keep that bar bopping around between 0 and 1, like this one is doing. Also, one of the other things I like to do is use the Logic Gain plugin. Here it is. And the Gain plugin has a mono switch. Now, if you're using Reaper, each individual track has a mono switch. The stereo bus has a mono switch. It's very convenient. Logic doesn't have that, so I use the gain plugin to do that. And a lot of times when I'm mixing, I will turn mono on. So even though I'm going to deliver this in stereo, right, I'm going to turn mono on so I can hear everything in mono and just get a feel for what it sounds like in mono. And what I'm listening for is just making sure I can still hear everything. And in particular, since I use lots of delays and reverbs and modulation, I want to make sure that all of those different types of time-based effects aren't creating phasing issues that are going to cause the signal to collapse if it goes into mono. Because frankly, when people listen to music outside of a stereo system or headphones, you're going to get a lot of mixing crosstalk between the two stereo channels. And if you're listening on an Alexa speaker or a HomePod or something like that, the stereo image is going to be non-existent. So it's important to understand what your piece is going to sound like in mono. And again, if we go back to that multimeter, if you look at the correlation here, you can see it's all the way to the right. And if we look at the phase meter here, right? Now, if I turn mono off, and this meter is good because I can see the sides, the left and right material, but I can also see I've got a good solid vertical line, which is the middle or the mono. It's not really mono, but it's like the middle of the stereo image is nice and solid, right? So I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. A lot of times what I'll do for stereo imaging when I'm mixing also is just solo a particular track and see what it looks like. So here's just the guitar. Looks pretty good. So if we look at our drums, that's great. And if we look at our Frippertronics, yeah, it's okay, but this is where phase cancellation is going to come in. Check that out. So if I mono it, let's hear what happens. It's okay. It doesn't fall apart completely, but it definitely loses the power or the strength of the signal when I collapse it to mono. Now, the good news is that this is way low in the mix, and it's supposed to be way low in the mix. So it's okay if it's a weaker kind of signal. And then finally, that synth bass, let's go ahead and solo that. Yeah. That's almost totally mono. So that's perfect. So that's how I think about stereo imaging. I think it's a really important topic for all of us who are creating ambient styles of music. We don't want our music to totally fall apart if somebody's listening to it in mono versus stereo. So I hope this mixing walkthrough was helpful for you. It's the way I think about things and the way I kind of go about mixing multi-track ambient guitar pieces. In the next episode of this series, I'm going to cover mastering and then preparing it for distribution to Spotify, Bandcamp, CD, etc. All right, as you can see, I've got Logic Pro fired up, and that's point number one. Logic Pro is the first tool that I use when I master my mixes. So let's see what I have going on. You'll see I've got a track set up for each of the songs that will be on the album. You can see the song titles here on the left-hand side. And in each track, what I've done is imported my mixed stereo file for the track. In other words, I've got a Logic project in which I do a full mix down for each piece, and then I pull it into a mastering project in Logic Pro. What I do is basically, again, I pull each of the stereo mixes into this Logic project. And I've got a couple of goals that I'm looking to accomplish in this mastering project. Number one, I want to get all of the pieces, all of the songs up to the correct level for distributing to iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all that good stuff. I want to get my levels right, and I want to get them balanced between each track, so that if you were to listen to the entire album, you could move from track to track without having to turn your volume control up and down. The second purpose is that I want to achieve a tonal balance that is pleasing as you move from track to track. I don't want one track to be overly bright. I don't want another track to be overly dull. I want them all to have a similar tonal balance, so it sounds like, if you're listening to it, it sounds like you're listening to an album. So to that end, what I have done on each of the tracks in the project, I have added a single plugin that I love, I've been using for many, many years. That's Isotope Ozone. And in this case, I'm using Ozone 10. So let me pull up Ozone for the hard road for this particular piece. If you think about mastering, mastering a track, it's really divided into a couple of different areas that you're going to want to address. One is EQ, so you'll be making likely little EQ tweaks. Another one is dynamic range. You may add a little compression, or maybe not, depending on the piece. A third one would potentially be imaging. In other words, the stereo image. You may adjust the stereo image so that all of the songs on your album have a similar kind of feel. And then, as I mentioned prior, the last piece that I normally address, is the issue of loudness, to make sure that all the pieces are of a similar loudness. So let's walk through this just a little bit. First, I'm going to turn off Ozone and play a little bit of the track, and then I'll turn it back on. Okay. Let me get to the spot where the drums are. There we go. Now I'm going to turn Ozone on. Now, it's not a crazy difference, but it is a good bit louder, again, because I want to bring it up to the correct level. I'll talk about that in a minute. So first up, let's talk about EQ. Ozone has an interesting capability where you can match the EQ of a particular song to a reference track or an EQ reference. In this case, actually across the board for my album, I'm using the reference that Ozone provides called Cinematic. And you can see here a kind of a visual of what the basic EQ curve looks like. So if I play the track, check this out. So you can see I'm kind of relatively close. It kind of follows the arc. And I don't want to try to force it in too much because it's not going to sound good. But I use that kind of as a reference for determining how to EQ. So I'm scooping out a little bit in the, say, 60 to 300 range. That's where a lot of mud lies. I'm bringing up a little bit in the high mids. So that would be 600 to about 3K. And then I've got a little lift as we get into the high end, the high frequencies of the song. And again, it sounds pretty good to me. Let me turn that off. You can hear it's pretty subtle. Now, Ozone 10, this is the newest version, has a couple of other cool features that are somewhat related to EQing. One of them is called Stabilizer. And this is a lot like the Soothe 2 or dynamic EQs that seek to reduce resonant frequencies. So I've been using this quite a bit on my masters for the last, several months or so. So if you watch what's going on here, you'll see that Stabilizer is dynamically reacting to the music and seeking to drop frequency ranges that might be a little more prominent and bring up frequency ranges that might be lagging a little bit. So you can see here we're dropping a little bit in that same range, that 100 to 300 range where that mud lives, and giving a little bit of lift in the high mids. Next up, I want to talk about compression. I don't have a full-on compressor on this track, but I'm using a microdynamics compressor that Ozone provides called Impact. And you can see what is happening here. Again, this is very subtle, but if you look at the line there in the middle, you'll see where it's compressing and expanding a little bit of the dynamic range. Yeah, and I think it helps. It just really helps to smooth out the dynamic range. The next topic is imaging. So this is the stereo image. And I do use the imager in Ozone 10 quite a bit to adjust my stereo image. And you can adjust the image by frequency range. So let me just play you an example here. Let's get the kind of the mids here. Now, if I bring down this slider, you'll hear it collapse to mono. And I can bring it way up. It's too much. Just about right. Just about right. So you can control each frequency band. You can adjust the bands however you wish, and then you can kind of customize that stereo image. It's always good, though, to check against mono to make sure that everything sounds like it makes sense. So Ozone has a little mono button right here that allows you to do so. Yeah, works great. Next up is dynamic EQ. This is another form of compression, but it allows you to specify a frequency range that you would like to compress, and it will then dynamically compress those frequency ranges. And as you can see, I'm not going for large amounts of compression. I'm looking for very subtle compression in different frequency ranges, again, to smooth out the tonal characteristic of the track. And then finally, let's talk about loudness. So I'm using the maximizer, and that's the limiter, the brick wall limiter that comes with iZotope. Almost every DAW has a brick wall limiter. Logic does, I know Studio One does, Reaper does, Pro Tools does, they all do, right? So this is iZotope's brick wall limiter. And I'm not really trying to brick wall limit here. What I'm looking to do is get this track up to a particular volume or loudness so I can feed it into the stereo bus. So before I go there for a minute, let's just take a look at, again, what I have going on. Each of these 10 tracks has its own instance of Ozone 10, and I've customized it to each track, and I've tried to get each track up to a particular level, and they all feed into the master bus so that when I render each of the tracks out, they're going to go through, the hard road is going to go through its own instance of Ozone 10, and then it will feed into the master bus and go through 3 other effects that I have lined up. Let's take a look at those. The first effect on the master bus is the FabFilter Pro R reverb. And I've got just a very mellow reverb setup, and it's the same reverb that all 8 tracks are going to run through. The reason why I'm using a reverb like this is to give each track a similar feel. In other words, each track has a feel like it's sitting in the same space. So this might be too subtle to hear on YouTube, but let me play this track, and I'm going to stop it and see if you can hear this reverb decay kind of ringing out. Did you hear that little bit of a room sound? Let me play it again. Okay, every track has that dynamic. So, for example, if we go to the first track, it's called Layers. It's the title track of the album. Again, you can hear that Pro R kind of room sound. So each track, I'm going to bounce each track individually to create the mastered file, but each track individually is going to go through that Pro R reverb and get the same reverb sound printed into the track, again, to give each track a familiar feel. The second thing I've got going on in the master bus that each track will run through after the reverb is a tape simulator. And I'm using the Soft Tube tape plugin, which I really, really, really like. So if you check this out here real quick. And I'm not going to go over all of these settings. It would take too long, but just let it be known I've got a kind of a tape setup where the level coming into this plugin bumps up against that 0 mark on the meter, so the 0 mark on the VU meter. So it's not going to be distorting a lot. It's going to be a mellow kind of tape sound. I'm using the cleanest tape type, which is A in this case. And I'm boosting the highs just a little bit to give it a little bit of shimmer, tape shimmer. And I think it sounds really good. So each of the 8 tracks is going to run again through this master bus. We're going to run through the Pro R reverb and then run through the Soft Tube tape plugin. And then finally, I've got a Plugin Alliance BX limiter True Peak limiter setup. And this is basically going to catch any of the peaks that are coming into it and limit it down to -1 dBFS, so -1 dB full scale, and it's going to be the true peak. So if we check this out, you can see what's going on here. All right, so that's what I'm doing in Logic. So I've got the 8 tracks set up. I'm adjusting each track separately with Ozone 10, and then I'm running each track through a set of 3 plugins that are all the same settings for each track. So in a way, I'm not really mixing, but I'm mastering into those 3 plugins. And in terms of loudness, what I'm shooting for is about -11 LUFS. So LUFS is a loudness standard that's commonly in use now, in particular for broadcast and for every streaming service. All right, as you can see in the middle of the screen, I've got Finder pulled up, and there are 8 wave files there. Those are the 8 tracks that I bounced out of Logic Pro after setting up the mastering plugins that I just reviewed with you. Once that's done, I pull those files into another piece of software. This piece of software is called Hofa cdburn.ddp.master. And I've been using this product for a long, long time. I really like it. It's totally optional, so don't feel like you need to go out and buy it or anything like that. But I like to use it because I do occasionally create mastering projects that are distributed on CDs. And this can easily create a CD distribution package according to the what is called the Red Book standard for CDs. So it's really convenient. But it's also really good for streaming distribution because it makes it very easy to sequence and time and space out the tracks. So as you can see here, I've got all 8 of my tracks lined up in the Hofa product. Here is that first piece again. Oh yeah. Here's the second piece. Oh yeah. And number 5. I'm giving you a little bit of a sneak peek into some of these sounds. Number 6. Number 7. There we go. And number 8, the hard road, which we've been talking about. So again, what I can do is just easily drag in each of these files and kind of sequence them out on the timeline. And in Hofa, it kind of tracks what's going on in the upper area here. And I can easily add in the titles, my ISRC numbers, and all the other information that I might want on the files. In addition, I want to talk about this for just a minute. You will see a little space called a pre-gap. So up in here, you'll see it's a pre-gap, and it's, in this case, it's 1 second and 747ths of a second, so 1.747 seconds. And what this is, it's a little gap between the 2 tracks. So for example, if I finish out layers here, let me go ahead and play that and listen to how it spaces with the next track, which is called The Water is Wide. Yeah, so if you think about a CD or a vinyl LP, what normally sits in between 2 of the tracks? It's a little space, right? And typically it's going to be in that 2-second kind of range. It could be a little bit shorter. It could be a little bit longer. And what that space does is it provides your brain just a little bit of a rest between each track. So you can do a little reset and your brain is ready to hear the next piece of music. One of the nice things that Hofa does automatically is when you set up your album layout and you create the pre-gap areas, when you render them out for streaming, what Hofa does is it adds the pre-gap to the previous track. So for example, this is track 1, Layers, and then I've got track 2, The Water is Wide. That 1.7 second gap would actually get added to as silence to the end of the first track, Layers. And that way, even though you're still, in a streaming environment or maybe on Bandcamp, when you play the album through, you still get that little gap between both of your songs, and you can still kind of retain that feel, that space, that drama, that kind of brain reset to make sure that your listeners are ready to hear the next track. You can simply render out into its final form, whether it's 16-bit or 24-bit, your finalized masters that will be delivered to either DistroKid or CD Baby or wherever, whoever you're using for distribution. All right, there you have it. That's my current process for mastering my albums. So again, if you don't have the same set of software, no worries. You can accomplish the same goals with whatever recording software you use. Almost every piece of recording software can be utilized to master music and to prepare it for final distribution. Just remember a few things that I've mentioned along the way. One is achieving a similar tonal balance across all of your tracks. So when people listen to your album, if they feel like it's a real album. Number 2 would be to ensure that the volume or the loudness levels of each of your tracks is similar, again, to create a seamless listening experience. And number 3 is to, again, on the loudness side, to get the loudness and the other specifications of the files up to whatever the standard is for your digital distributor. Once all that's done, the only thing left to do is to upload your music to your distributor. Do you have any mastering tips for us? If you do, I'd love it if you would drop a comment and let's get some conversation going around all of our best mastering tips so we can all benefit together. I've got a playlist here of other ambient guitar recording techniques, and I'll see all of you over on those videos.